All right. Gaza War Day 285. No end in sight. You guys probably saw the Human Rights Watch report on October 7th, religiously citing organizations like Zaka and the Israeli military as if they don't systematically lie and have not been long since caught and debunked and discredited as outright liars. But here we are. Human Rights Watch report was denounced by every single resistance faction today. If you were watching the resistance news, you would have seen every organization publish an individual detailed explanation and denunciation of the inaccuracies, lies, biases, pro-Israel bias of Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch is a joke. I wrote an article about this years ago called, um, I think it was called "The Human Rights Organizations Are Part of the Problem," and yeah, the human rights organizations are part of the problem, and it's all about how Human Rights Watch specifically. Joe Emersberger and I wrote about it for in the Venezuelan context in our book Extraordinary Threat, but I wrote this essay where we talk about their stance on Israel, which is ridiculous. They're able to read the minds of Israelis and know that the Israeli government is innocent in their minds and hearts, but the resistance is not. So they say the resistance targets civilians, but Israel just hits them accidentally. And I'm pretty sure they maintain that even to this day. So that's and by through that simple mechanism, they spent decades exonerating Israel and demonizing the resistance. So that's always been their role. Human Rights Watch has always been a spectacularly pro-US fraudulent human rights organization. It does not believe in universal rights. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty, neither of them are against war on principle. So that's why you'll see weird things from them, like when a war starts, they'll say we entreat the Israelis to not break laws during their destruction of Lebanon or Palestine or whatever, because they're not against war. They're just against specific rights violations in war, as if the Israelis or the Americans could fight a war without violating human rights. Anyway, so that's Human Rights Watch. The International Criminal Court apparently is weeks away from issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. Another thing I'll file under, I'll believe it when I see it. The International Criminal Court is another thing I wrote an article about years back, and the article is called "Don't Expect Justice from the Imperial Criminal Court." So I'm not holding my breath on that one. And I do see that the United Kingdom and Germany have also, in a typically dignified way, both intervened with the International Criminal Court to try to stop them from issuing warrants, which will probably work. Um, the UK argument was the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction because Palestine's not a state. We'll see how that works. And Germany had another cool argument. Germany said, no, well, our argument is that you can't determine whether Israel used too much force until after the war's over. So we have to let them finish the genocide first, and then we can judge whether they use too much force. So that would be a very good, solid German instance of reasoning, historically in keeping with the kinds of reasoning we've associated with um, uh, Germany and genocide and so on. So I saw a tweet about the German wave of arrests of people who are protesting. There's a lot of people in Germany that are anti-genocide, a lot of people that are protesting, and the repression of those people and those groups is absolutely, again, in keeping with Germany's history. Someone said on Twitter that 43% of the people being arrested for anti-Semitism in Germany are Jewish, and 100% of the people doing the arresting are Nazis. So that's a kind of a clever tweet that I saw today. And they're not just calling them that casually. These are German police that are in that type of chat group, and there's a active underground movement in Germany to bring back the good old days. There's always been. So it's literally true. Those people are in the police, disproportionately in the police and whatever armed forces. That's where you'll find those people today as well. All right, well, that's the international front. Shall we talk about what's going on in Israel? I heard about, I didn't see, but I heard from a reliable source. Did you guys see a video of a woman with walking around a mall with a meat cleaver? She apparently stabbed a security guard at a mall in Israel. This is an Israeli woman, and she did that after killing her son and her dog, and people are just kind of walking by. There was another video I was told about, also didn't watch, about a soldier making a video sending back home where he's stepping over corpses as he as he makes the video and says, I'm not going to show you this because there's a corpse. He's on the beach. I mean, this is like the guy's doing this caricature that Caitlin Johnston made. Caitlin Johnston made this kind of um, funny like a satirical, it's like a Voltaire style satire, where she called it, just a short story she wrote on Twitter where it's called Two Americans Walking Down the Street and Talking About Politics. It's a satire of how in the West, people obsess over the trivial differences between political parties while ignoring the actual genocide that's bipartisan to both and the entire class. Man, that thing with Trump was so freaky, said Carl while stepping over a woman in hijab, clutching a dead child to her chest. I know, man. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, said Steve, nimbly leapfrogging a large puddle of blood. And it goes on like that, in this kind of darkly humorous way. And that's actually what Israelis are doing. They're making that video, not as a satire, but they're actually making that video. So to the like I said, I can't verify, maybe you guys have seen these videos, but i I've said this, I've maintained this better part of a year now, that if you get to that point where you're so casual about torture and murder and celebrating it on social media and taking direct action to ensure children starve and stomping on flour bags, that's gonna you're gonna lose your ability to tell right from wrong. You're not gonna be able to turn that off when it comes time for you to have a normal job or a relationship or even fight a war and be reliable to your comrades in arms. So I think that Israel is dissolving itself, absolutely self-destructing just through this depraved behavior that they're exhibiting. And I think it's just happening before our eyes in videos that they're recording for one another and for pleasure. All right, well, let's get to the reports from the fronts. West Bank, as I record, the Israelis are invading Nablus. There's fighting in Nablus. The resistance are reporting uh, gun battles with Israeli invaders in Nablus. Tulkarm, I don't know if it's still going, but there was an invasion in Tulkarm. They downed a drone, like they've been doing in Gaza, the Islamic Jihad, Surah al-Quds, the armed wing of Islamic Jihad. They downed a drone. They showed a picture of their downed drone. They were very proud of it. Um, it was preceded in Tulkarm by the Palestinian Authority invading at 3 a.m. to destroy various mines and roadside bombs that the resistance had placed to defend the the town from Israeli invasion. The person recording said something like, "We thought we were getting bombed, but it turns out our respected authority came to detonate explosive devices at 3 a.m." So, a very sarcastic message from townspeople about the role of the Palestinian Authority, which is amazing in terms of how they keep going on this self and other destructive course of action, which leads absolutely nowhere, but they persist. Persistence does seem to be a quality that is shared across the board in a long war. So, Gaza, highly intense massacres continue. Israel is massacring concentrations of people, targeting concentrations of people for dropping these big bombs that the Americans have just given them. It's apparently a just-in-time inventory kind of situation where they get the big bombs and they drop them immediately on tents or churches or schools or mosques, gatherings of people. They're specifically trying to kill gatherings of people. Meanwhile, fighting in Tel Al Sultan, in Yabna camp, Tel Al Hawa in Gaza City. There's an 8-minute video that probably John will talk about. Hope you guys enjoyed John and Nora and Abdul Jawad Omar on the Electronic Intifada live stream earlier. Um, so John will probably break this down. I don't think he broke it down because it just came out today, but it was near the Muhammad Al Amin roundabout. It's an 8-minute long video of a complex ambush. So it was quite a sequence to watch, and the usual rocketing along the Netzarim corridor. Now, I saw a report from this Sidi Timan concentration camp, this Steteman, where the stories of the worst tortures have come out. You've seen, all the rape and sodomization with fire extinguishers and all of these other horrific stories, in addition to the starvation and other tortures. But the Israeli media apparently reported that they're holding 1,500 unidentified Gaza bodies, people's bodies in freezers organized by number. This is apparently, I got it from the Resistance News, but they're reporting it coming from the Israeli media. They've recovered bodies. They've had bodies returned to Gaza, mutilated, sometimes signs of organ harvesting. So it's just unimaginable horror that the Israelis are committing in this camp. And again, the camp guards are, they're your friends and neighbors, and these are the people that Canadian politicians, American politicians are supporting and funding and wishing the best too, and accusing of racism people who oppose that. So we're in quite a moral moment in the West, in the Western countries. The Yemen front, there's video, which is rare for the Yemen front. There's usually reports that we read, or Yahya Sari comes on and talks to you from the podium. But this time there's video of them repeatedly hitting an oil tanker, the Chios, Chios Lion, the Chios Lion. And there's video of real explosive hits on this oil tanker, um, followed by U.S. and American bombing of Hodeidah and targets close to the Saudi border, which the Yemen Ansarallah is saying, we noticed where you bombed us from, and we noticed that it might have been from Saudi territory, and they've been threatening Saudi quite directly. Saudi's not fulfilling its obligations under the ceasefire agreement that's, I don't know, 2 years old now. And I think and Yemen sources that I've been seeing, they say that Yemen's military is 4 times as strong as it was when they compelled the Saudis to sign a ceasefire agreement with them 2 years ago. That's why Syed Abdul Malik Al Houthi in his speeches is saying, this is really stupid. What are you doing? Stop this. And the Saudis must be under unbelievable pressure from the Americans to keep to keep it up, to, violate the ceasefire and try to do harm to the Yemen economy and try to pressure Ansarallah as if they could be pressured through economic pressure to stop supporting Palestine. You should know who you're dealing with by now. You should know what Ansarallah is by now. But apparently not. And so I don't know. I think this could blow up. I thought the Lebanon war would be starting sometime soon in the next couple weeks, but maybe the next thing that's going to happen is the Yemen attacking Saudi Arabia because they've been threatening them increasingly directly. The Saudis are not seeing reason, it doesn't look like. And I don't know. I imagine it could happen while Netanyahu's making his speech on the floor of Congress. Wouldn't that be a way to take for the Yemenis to take the wind out of his sails? Who knows? But that's definitely something that will be continuing to develop over the coming days. Okay, now today's focus is the Lebanon front, because now Nasrallah gave a couple of speeches, one yesterday, one today, to commemorate the end of a 10-day period. It's Muharram, it's Ashura. Ashura is 10, so I think Ashura is the 10th day of Muharram. Muharram is a specific holy month in Islam. And Nasrallah's speeches were full of historical references and Islamic history and lore, which I haven't not studied. And you guys know from my historical podcast that I do modern history. I don't, aside from some Roy Casagranda lectures that I've been listening to since TikTok put it in front of me, I don't have much knowledge of that period of the Islamic history, the period when the Muslims were, I know something about the Romans and the Greeks just for fun because Mr. Power was into that period and would give me things to read and recommendations, but I don't know hardly anything about Islamic history from, six. I did take one medieval Spain course, um, but yeah, like 400, that time from like 400 to 500 to 1500, that 1,000 years is not something I've studied, and all of Nasrallah's references were from that period. So it was fascinating to listen to because the way that he connected that Islamic lore from that period to what their struggles today. And I can't imagine, um, I don't know, it's hard for me to imagine a Christian equivalent of that where they're um, in the resistance. I suppose all US politicians reference the Bible. Chavez referenced Jesus. Chavez would always talk about Jesus and Jesus's qualities and courage and fortitude during his political interventions, I suppose. So maybe it's not as much of a stretch as I'm presenting it. But he had a couple of things. There's a couple of highlights from the speeches that I wanted to emphasize. And before that, I wanted to say there's an old video of Nasrallah from 2000 going around, and he's talking in 2000 about how Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader, um, from the 70s till he died in 2004. Nasrallah in 2000 said Arafat could have got Gaza. Remember, Gaza was still occupied. There were still settlements in Gaza up until 2005. So there were settlements in Gaza when Arafat died. They only left after that. They only left in 2005 because of resistance. But Nasrallah said Arafat could have got all of Gaza back with no conditions, with no settlements there, if he had been a little more patient and not signed a deal with Israel. And the person who's interviewing him is also a very confident and knowledgeable person. And he was like, well, he got a state. And Nasrallah said, where's this state? And the interviewer said, well, he's got a flag and symbols and all of this stuff. And Nasrallah said, does that really make a state though? So they had this little argument, but ultimately Nasrallah, you reveal r revealed a lot about how Nasrallah thinks because it's clear that Nasrallah doesn't believe in making deals with Israel. Nasrallah believes in only resistance. Only resistance can get you what you want, and you don't need a deal. He's just like, we don't make an agreement. They withdraw because they have to. So it's all understood in terms of unilateral moves by one side or the other. And it, like the Lebanon front is the same, right? He says like we're not today. I mean, the Lebanon front today. Nasrallah has been very clear that they're not going to make a deal to calm the Lebanon front. The deal is they'll stop when the Israeli aggression on Gaza stops. That's it. So it's not let's sit down and hash our differences out because that to Nasrallah's way of thinking is normalization. That's to be avoided, right? That's recognition of Israel, which he doesn't want to do. He's not willing to do. So the first speech from yesterday, I think it was yesterday, yeah, was interesting because he had this historical discussion and biblical discussion because apparently people probably know this better than me, but apparently in the ancient this is what Nasrallah says. Again, ancient history, biblical history, not my thing. But there's some 80-year curse they refer to that Israeli kingdoms didn't last, or I guess when ancient Israel didn't last longer than 80 years. It was conquered by the Persians or the Assyrians or something, and or the Egyptians or something, and then the first time, and then the second time it was conquered by the Romans. This is either in the Bible or in, I think it's in the Bible. Um, I've read the Bible. I'm not completely ignorant of the stuff, but it doesn't stick. It doesn't stick in my brain as well as the modern history or facts or details. So um, please, I ask your forbearance when I write about anything like this. I would have the references in front of me. But yeah, so there's some reference to something called an 80-year curse. Feel free to educate me in the comments, those of you who know all this ancient history, and I'd be happy to hear more about it. So there's this 80-year curse. Nasrallah says um, there's an 80-year curse and God will punish them for being arrogant. And he says that then he brings it back to the present and he says there's Israeli data that shows that Israel is unraveling and it's 76 years old now. So it's fulfilling the 80-year curse now. I'm a little dubious about this because if it was like 100-year curse, then they could say they could pick a date when the settlement of Israel started, like in the 1890s or 1900, 1906 or whatever it was. I guess Balfour, 1917 would be a good date. So by 1917, when the British took Palestine from the Ottoman Empire and declared that it was going to be a Jewish homeland, that's kind of like maybe already the beginning of Israel. But then if you make it 1948, then I guess 2028 would be the 80-year mark. So I don't know. I don't really make much of this kind of stuff, but Nasrallah thinks it's important to Israelis, and he talks about how Israelis have been talking about it. So I suppose whether it's material or not, and I don't think it is, but if it's whether it's material or not, if enough people believe it, it becomes a fact, right? If people are making decisions based on an 80-year curse, then you better know about the 80-year curse, I suppose. And then I know that months ago, John Elmer and I watched a Nasrallah speech where he gave surprisingly detailed instructions about security, like don't get one of those ring cameras for God's sake, and don't get cameras that face the street, and don't link your cameras to the internet so that the Israelis can use them to spy on our entire society, and don't use your cell phones. And he was just giving like really detailed, surprisingly detailed um, instructions about social media, not social media, but like surveillance technology behavior. And today he gave surprisingly detailed, or yesterday he gave surprisingly detailed social media behavior guidance. He said, there's people that are influential that are trying to sow divisions and sectarianism online. And it's and he said, if you want to respond to them, fine. If they're influential and you want to respond to them and argue with them, that's fine. But then there are people whose entire influence comes from us, from arguing with us or taking a position relative to us. So for God's sake, don't give them additional clout by going and arguing with them online. Ignore them. Don't feed them the responses and the fame that they're looking for by arguing with them. So I don't know who he's subtweeting there, but he's definitely trying to tell people not to engage with some range of social media actors that are trying to entangle them into fights with, uh, entangle Hezbollah into fights with them. So that was yesterday's speech, and then today was another. Today was emotional because he was addressing a rally live. I gather he had some ability to see what the rally was doing, and so he was almost leading chants at various points. He was literally leading chants. There were people were chanting. It was a huge crowds in Lebanon celebrating this day. It's celebrating the martyrdom of one of their key religious figures, Hussein. I learned a little bit about Hussein. He chose martyrdom in a hopeless battle. And so in the way Nasrallah was talking about him is that he's like incredibly courageous and was not going to abandon principle and it was not going to abandon dignity even though he faced hopeless odds and so that's why he's this type of figure who's celebrated as a martyr. And he connects Hussein with today's war with Israel. And he cites Israeli media again on the way that Israeli society is unraveling, reverse migration, and um, how they're losing self-confidence. They're losing the confidence of others. He cites Israeli media talking about the figures of 9,000 plus, 99,200 plus permanently disabled. He talks about shortages of officers, shortages of tanks, and then he says, you won't have shortages of tanks if you come to Lebanon. You won't have any tanks at all. He also made another explicit threat, and it's important to remember Nasrallah doesn't bluff. He said, if you keep targeting civilians the way that you have in Lebanon, because there were a few big massacres that Israel did in Lebanon against civilians, he said, we will start hitting new settlements that we haven't hit before. So there's no reason to think Israel's going to stop hitting Lebanese civilians. That's what they do. And so I imagine we're going to see this continue to expand. Nasrallah made a promise to the people of southern Lebanon that are on the front line with Israel that Hezbollah and the Lebanese government are going to rebuild the South better than it was before. He said, "This is our promise to you. We've made this promise in the past. They made that promise in 2006, and he made a big speech in 2006 that I remember, um, where he talked about how they promised they're going to rebuild. They rebuilt it as they promised, right? So all the people who make these sacrifices are not going to, it's not going to be in vain, and they're not going to be abandoned at the end of the war. And um, there was a letter that I saw on the resistance media from Qassam, like Qassam fighters, and they left a handwritten note in somebody's house where they said, we had to take some stuff, and we used your house for, we thank you in advance, or we're sorry for having to use your house or whatever. And it's like these kinds of letters to the residents that when fighters were in an area or in a people's house, that Lebanon, Hezbollah was also famous for that, and apparently guerrilla fighters throughout the ages have been like this. They left these kind of thank you notes for in Hezbollah's case, Nasrallah, I think himself cited messages where they would write out like an invoice or like a receipt of what they took, like if they took two water bottles or whatever it was, that they would make sure that they returned all of that at the end of the war. The last thing he said was there's no agreement. He reiterated that there's no agreement. They're going to stop when the aggression on Gaza stops. So there's no agreement that's in the works. He said there's apparently rumors that the Israel and Lebanon or Israel and Hezbollah are on the verge of a deal. He's like, no, we're not. We're not on the verge of any deal. So, um, those were Nasrallah's speeches. Um, I don't know. There were, in terms of the Lebanon front, I don't know if I mentioned this already, but there's a lot of rocket attacks and missile attacks. Kiryat Shimona especially was hit a lot. You may have seen Ali, what is his name? Mortaza? Uh, he was he did one of his "Hello, My Enemies" about the rocket attacks on Kiryat Shimona. And then there's this group that we've been seeing on the resistance media a little bit called the Lebanese Brigades to Resist Israeli Occupation. And they're Sunnis, Christians. So remember, Hezbollah, this was today was a great example. This is a Shia holiday. This holiday of Ashura today. It's a Shia holiday. That Hussein is a important figure in the Shia um, sect of Islam. But there's Sunni and Christians, and they're working with Hezbollah. So the Lebanese Brigades to Resist Israeli Occupation, they're not Shia, so they're not technically like part of Hezbollah, which I guess is Shia, but they militarily integrated with Hezbollah. And so this is like the Lebanese version of the Palestinian unity of the fields, where they fight together, even though they have religious or political differences, which they have. All right, so that's the reports from the front. So there's a little bit of a controversy that I wanted to talk to you guys about and tell me what you think. Because it was on Scott Ritter's Twitter feed and Telegram and Caitlin Johnstone, as you know, I'm a follower. I follow Caitlin Johnstone on Twitter especially, and I think she's really good at writing tweets and really principled, and I like her style a lot. And so she kind of mocked the idea of of showing great concern over Trump's superficial wound on his ear compared to the genocide of hundreds of thousands of people and the deaths of tens of thousands of children and mass starvation. And so she was kind of contemptuous. She said, if you're worried more about this superficial wound, I think she called it an ear boo-boo, than the genocide, then you've lost the plot. And then Scott Ritter replied to her, and he was very upset. He took umbrage at the idea of calling it an ear boo boo, and he said, this could have led to a civil war, and um and so you shouldn't be so dismissive, kind of thing. And then Eva Bartlett, Vanessa Beeley, pro-Palestine people that are kind of, I'd say like closer to Scott, and politically closer to Scott. Um, like I think they know Scott better. Scott's been on this channel too. I have a lot of respect for Scott's analysis. As you know, I've cited him many times. Um, we were pretty explicit, I think, about the fact that we have about our differences politically, but we agreed where we agreed. Um, but Eva Bartlett, Vanessa Beeley, Caitlin, they were all kind of arguing with Scott over the past few days, and Scott's argument was basically, as I understand it, and if Scott, if you're listening to this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of Scott's argument is America is still, the leader of the free world, and so if America is in a civil war situation or if America is dysfunctional, then the Israel Gaza, the Israel Palestine problem won't be solvable because America will be too busy to help. and and I don't and like this was not something that really this was kind of an assumption that I think Scott made that was implicit in what Scott was saying that was not necessarily contested explicitly by Caitlin or Eva or Vanessa, but it was like it was they were emphasizing kind of the moral like the moral disparity between concern over Trump's um survival of a Trump being a what an imperial manager as Caitlin called him and a billionaire imperial manager and his survival with a flesh wound of this attack compared to the active genocide that the US is funding and arming and covering for. But there's also like a matter of logic, which is that I don't think the problem with the US in Palestine is inattention. So, nobody wants I would never wish a civil war on anybody. I'm not wishing anything. I'm here to describe what is, right? I'm not here to wish. I'm not here to make wishful thinking or fantasies. I write fantasies sometimes. My latest Substack was a fantasy. But that's speculative fiction and that's labeled as such, so that's a different thing. My but like on this channel, I'm here to describe what's going on. I'm here to analyze what's happening. And like as a matter of analysis, if the US was too busy to focus on Israel Palestine, I think the situation in Palestine would be much better. I think the problem for Palestine and Palestinians is too much American attention, too many American bombs, too much American vetoing of initiatives at the UN, too much American bullying of other countries, too many American bases and resources surrounding Israel and enabling Israel to do every horrific thing, including genocide, as we're watching, with no consequence from anywhere. That's US attention. That's caused by US attention on the problem. That's caused by US focus on the problem. That's not caused by US inattention on the problem. I would think that more attention from the US would make it even worse. So that's the piece of logic that I don't quite understand. Now, there's also a political point that Scott, I think, is making, which is like he says, I'm an American. I believe in America. I love America. I want the best for America. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't. I respect that if that's not your thing. Um, and and I like it's impossible if you're not how can I put it? Like America is a place full of people, and you can love a place and you can love people, but like America is also a project and it's a specific project that started in the 1600s to and was based on slave labor and displacement of indigenous people and the privatization of property and then the appropriation of much of the world, colonizing Hawaii and Puerto Rico and all of these other islands and extending all these bases all over the world and dropping nuclear bombs on places and testing nuclear bombs in these paradisical islands in the Pacific. And that's America. America's all those things. America's occupation of Iraq. America's Israel. America's these genocides of indigenous people in California all the way across the West, right? That's America. So, you know, what like America's so many things. It's hard to it's hard to parse like how do you say you love America? Like what do you love about America? Do you love everything about you can't, it's not a well formulated enough concept because you can't love the project of America. You can love the place you grew up in. You can love your hometown. You can love the culture, the composite, culture that's developed, but also, want to, and Scott says this, he says he wants to remedy the injustice. He wants to make it better. Okay. But like, if you remedy the injustice to the point of like returning the land as per like Winona LaDuke's Islands in a Continent, or Ward Churchill's essay called I Am Indigenous, or like some of these programs where they imagine what it would be like to return a whole bunch of the US to indigenous sovereignty. Is that still America? If you transform the relationship with the African American population to the point where you have reparations, is that still America? Like, I don't know. So that's a whole, if you completely change the foreign policy to the point where you don't have any foreign bases and you're not bullying other countries, is it still America? Because if that's still America and you love that, then do you love America as it is? Can you love America as it is now? Anyway, these are all kind of questions. Um, that arose for me. I don't think Scott is under any obligation to answer them, or has any interest in answering them, but that those are the things that occurred to me when I watched this kind of debate unfold, which was like, logically, I don't think the region suffers from a lack of attention, or would suffer from a greater lack of attention. And I also, I don't really think the question of whether we want what's something X or Y for America is at issue. It's like, the issue is, you know, what's going on. The issue is the genocide and how to stop it. And I don't think the US is part of the solution. I think the US is part of the problem. I don't that's what I'm not getting from Scott's answer, is how the US is part of the solution there. I don't think it is. Hmm. The only other thing that kind of came out was like, I think Scott takes the position that like Trump is the lesser evil. I mean, Biden is proven genocider. Trump happened to not be in office during the genocide, but I think if Trump wins and the war continues, then I think the genocide will continue, and then Trump will be personally as steeped in this genocide as Biden was. And so I think that's a matter of time, and who's in office. And that's why it's like a systemic question from my perspective, not a question of who's in office, because every US president is worse than the one before. And it doesn't matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans, because the nature of the system is such that you're always going towards more privatization, more violence against more countries, more war, more sanctions. So that's kind of how it seems to be trending. And so I imagine, I think Biden was worse. Biden was worse than Trump, the previous Trump, but probably the next Trump will be worse than Biden. And that tells me that it's a system. It's not an electoral outcome. And I guess the last thing about that, because like, lesser evilism is something that always comes up in these electoral times. And I think it's really hard to maintain the idea for liberals, or people on the left, to maintain the idea that Biden is the lesser evil. Like, there's no genocide is not a lesser evil. There's no lesser evil. You can't play the lesser evil game with when there's a genocide. So that just doesn't fly. But now, if you're saying Trump is the lesser evil because he's not actually involved in the genocide yet, I just think this is everybody making an argument for third parties. And if you don't believe in third parties as like a feasible thing, I don't know what to say. I mean, it's not feasible this time. but like every time is a time, and if it's not feasible this time and it's not feasible next time, and you're not, could you come up with a 50-year plan when it's feasible? Maybe you can do something now that'll make it feasible in 50 years or 25 years or 20 years. And if you could, that shouldn't you? So I just, I really think that I've been listening to lesser evil arguments from people that I respect for a long time, for many decades, and I haven't heard enough kind of systematic, um or let's say the weakness of the lesser evilism, and watching the results of the lesser evilism has gone quite a ways to convincing me that a long-term plan for a third party makes a lot more sense. So that was a long, elaborate thing. Tell me what you thought of it, and I'll be back with the normal the normal content. There's another thing I want to do a deep dive on in the coming days, and that's I want to ask the question in a future video. I don't know when it'll be, sometime in the next few videos, of whether Israel could conceivably have won the Gaza war. If you accept that they're not winning, they have not won. Could they have won? Was there some set of decisions, actions they could have taken that would have enabled them to win? So I will try to tackle that in a coming video. Until then, hang on, hang in there, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.